Alright, hey y'all, it's Miss Summers with your notes today on biodiversity. So our goal today is to be able to explain why biodiversity is important. So in order to do that, we need to know what biodiversity is, how we measure it, and then what are some threats to biodiversity. Alright, so let's start by reviewing spheres of the Earth. This is something we talked about way back in August. Alright, we talked about these four spheres and how they interacted. So we had our geo or lithosphere, which is the solid part of Earth. We have the hydrosphere, which makes up all the water on Earth. Our atmosphere is the air, the gases that surround our planet, and then lastly our biosphere, which contains all life on Earth. Okay? Life is going to be found within ecosystems. And these ecosystems are going to be found pretty much everywhere on Earth, along the crust, in the water, and to a certain extent up into the atmosphere. Alright, so let's look at some elements of the ecosystem. What does an ecosystem contain? So an ecosystem contains two big groups. We had the biotic factors of an ecosystem and the abiotic factors. So the biotic factors, so bio means life, biotic factors are the living parts. So they could be your animals, so like different types of animals are going to affect each other because you'll have some predators and some prey. We have things like bacteria and fungi, which are the decomposers. They break down dead stuff. And then our plants, kind of the unsung heroes of all of our ecosystems, because plants make up the bottom of the food chains or the food web. All right. Abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the ecosystem, and they're just as important as these guys because the abiotic factors impact what kind of life you can have. All right. So an example of an abiotic factor would be water. How much water do you get? Water is going to affect what kind of plants you can have. Same with climate and soil and sunlight. All right, these abiotic factors impact our biotic factors. All right, so those are the things that we're going to see in an ecosystem. All right, before we jump into our discussion on biodiversity, I do want to very quickly go over the levels of organization. So we're talking about ecosystems, we're talking about biospheres, we're going to talk about populations and communities. I want you to know the difference. All right, so when we're talking about the biosphere and all life on Earth, life is going to fall within these levels, okay? Everybody belongs to a group, all right? And how big the group is depends on where you are in this chain. So the biosphere, that's the biggest one. All of us belong to the same biosphere, all right? It's the place on Earth that supports life, okay? So we're all in the same biosphere. A biosphere, or the biosphere I should say, can be broken down into different biomes. All right, a biome is a major community, all right, or a habitat classified by what kinds of plants it has and what kind of climate it experiences. So, for example, there's tropical rainforest biomes that have very high temperatures year-round and lots of precipitation, and there's lots of trees, lots of different kinds of plants, all that good stuff. And then there's desert biomes. Desert biomes are very dry climates, low precipitation. You might have a lot of temperature variation and very little vegetation. All right, those are examples of two different biomes. All right, within a biome, you're going to have different ecosystems. All right, so we live in a deciduous forest biome. Our ecosystem is going to be this particular place that we're living in. So Iredell County, that's an ecosystem. Mooresville, that's kind of like an ecosystem. The ecosystem, again, contains those biotic, living, and non-living abiotic factors. Okay? Within an ecosystem, okay, so now we're looking at one particular place. Within an ecosystem, you are going to have a community. Community includes all the living things interacting together. So all your animals and all your plants and your bacteria and your funguses, all your living thingies. All right, a community can be broken up into different populations. So a population is a member of a single species that all live together. So for example, in my classroom, if we were all here in my classroom, we would have a population of humans because we're all the same species, but we also have a population of leopard geckos that live in the back of the room. We have a population of bacteria that live on the desks. We have a population of whatever other little creepy crawlies live around. All right, as long as they're the same species and they live in the same spot, they're in the same population. And then within a population is made up of several organisms, a single living member. So you are an organism, a bacteria is an organism, an ant is an organism, because it's one thing within that population. Okay? I wanted to go over this because when we talk about biodiversity, there's different types of biodiversities at different levels. So keep that in mind. All right, so let's look at biodiversity. What it is, why we care, all that good stuff. All right, so biodiversity is what it sounds like. It's the variety of life that you have. The variety of life within an ecosystem. In a healthy ecosystem, you're going to have a high biodiversity, a wide variety. You want a bunch of different things. You don't want all one thing. That's not good. All right. Currently on Earth, there's an estimated 13 million species of living organisms, which might sound like a lot. It kind of is. However, at current estimates, we're losing on average 27,000 species a year to extinction. Okay, species can go extinct for a multitude of reasons, including habitat loss, climate change, disease, whatevskis. All right. These species, these 13 million species, they don't all live in the same place, the same biomes necessarily. Different biomes have different levels of biodiversity. All right. Biomes have different levels of biodiversity based upon those biotic factors that are present. So I'll give you an example. A biome with a low biodiversity would be a desert. Deserts have a low biodiversity because there's not a lot of resources like water. Water is very limited, so you can't support a lot of different types of plants, and if you don't have a whole bunch of different types of plants, you can't have a whole lot of different types of animals. All right. An example of a biome with a high biodiversity would be a tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests have abiotic factors like lots of water, lots of sunshine, pretty high temperatures, lots of soil formation that can support a greater variety of stuff. That's why the majority of Earth's species, this 13 million, you can find about half of them in the tropical rainforest, even though that's a relatively small biome. If you're looking at like the total of the Earth, not a lot of space, but you have lots of different living things there. Okay, the moral of the story, we want, ideally, a high biodiversity, ideally. All right, so let's look at how we measure biodiversity. There's 3 different levels, and we're going to come back to that levels of organization now. Smallest level, we can have biodiversity in terms of genetics, so genetic biodiversity. Genetic biodiversity is how different your gene pool is within a population. So these are all the same animals or all the same types of organisms. We're looking at how different they are. So in this one, if these are our little chromosomes, we have, this one has a yellow up here and an orange here, and these has 2 yellows, and this is an orange on this top one, but a yellow here, and we have orange and red and yellow. All right, the more variety you have, the healthier this population will be. Okay, We have species biodiversity. This is the variety within a community. So remember, communities are a whole bunch of groups of species living together and interacting. So this picture shows species biodiversity. We have trees and 1, 2, 3, 4 other types of plants. We have a fungus. We have a slug, a froggy frog. This is like a vole or something. I don't know what it is. All right, the more species you have, the healthier that community is. And lastly, we have ecosystem biodiversity. How diverse are your ecosystems across a landscape in a general region? All right, so this is not just talking about the living things, okay, your populations, your communities, your organisms, but it's also talking about your variety of the abiotic factors like water, soil. So in this picture, okay, we have this forest ecosystem over here. Okay, this is going to have probably a different type of soil than over here. That's why there's different plants. We have a stream ecosystem that's going to be able to support a whole bunch of living things because there's different habitats essentially. Okay? More biodiversity you have, the better. So why is that important? Why do I keep saying that? Why is it a good thing that we have more as opposed to less? All right, and there's 4 big reasons. All right, reason numero uno. Living things are interdependent. One species depends on another species. Okay, and generally, it's not just one species depending on one other. A species may depend on 4 or 5 or 10 different species. All right, an argument that I hear a lot as somebody who studied bugs when I was in college, a lot of people were like, why can't we just get rid of mosquitoes, yo? Mosquitoes cause human disease. They're kind of a pest. They're annoying. People are allergic to them. You know, can't we just get rid of them? And the answer is absolutely not, because yes, even though mosquitoes are annoying and they spread disease and that's not a good thing, fish depend on mosquitoes for food. And then other fish depend on those fish for food. Amphibians depend on mosquitoes for food. Other bugs, like dragonflies, depend on mosquitoes for food. And then those dragonflies are food for something else. All right, we're all connected in a food web. It's kind of like the circle of life, except it's not really a circle. It's like a spider web. Okay? Reason number 2, why we want biodiversity. Okay, and if you've taken biology, you've probably heard this before. If you haven't taken biology, here's a little sneak preview. Here's kind of a big idea in biology. If you have a higher biodiversity, it reduces the chances that a species is going to go extinct. This is especially true with genetic biodiversity. Okay, so let's take this as an example. Okay, if you get sick and you go to the doctor and they give you some antibiotics, okay, the antibiotics are going to kill all the bacteria that are making you sick. And you only need one kind of medicine because all those bacteria are genetically the same. Because bacteria, when bacteria have babies, they just basically make photocopies of themselves. All right? But if these bacteria were to become a little different, that would increase the odds that one of them might survive. All right, this is one of the advantages. All right, animals reproduce, they reproduce sexually, which just means they have 2 sources of DNA, like a mom and a dad. All right, that method of reproduction is beneficial because your offspring are all a little bit different. You increase your odds that at least one of them is going to survive. Okay, the more diversity you have, the better your odds are of not completely dying out. Okay, that's why when you limit diversity, like if you talk about like puppy dogs, like purebred dogs, especially purebred dogs typically have a very limited genetic diversity. You have a lot of close breeding with two individuals that might be highly related. All right, you limit how diverse the offspring are. That's why some purebreds can be prone to becoming sick, because you have that limited genetic diversity. All right, Nummer 3 in Deutsch. Variety of organisms helps maintain an ecosystem. So remember, ecosystems have living and non-living things in them, abiotic and biotic. Living things can help with your abiotic factors, not just the other way around. So living things contribute to soil formation, breaking down pollution, storing nutrients. The more you have, the healthier the overall ecosystem is. And lastly, biodiversity is important because it gives us a larger pool of resources. All right, humans use stuff. Okay, we use stuff from all over the world. We use food, medicinal purposes. This pretty flower right here is called the Madagascar periwinkle. You'd be like, oh, that's a pretty flower, Miss Summers. It is a pretty flower, but it's even more amazing than that, because the Madagascar periwinkle, its leaves, when the leaves are dried, contains a compound that is capable of fighting cancer cells. All right? A lot of medicines, okay, that we use in therapies, we didn't come up with them all by ourselves. We came up with them because we saw something in nature that inspired us. The first antibiotic ever made was called penicillin. And if you know the story about penicillin, penicillin is actually made from a mold. All right, and then a scientist was like, oh, that's weird. Bacteria doesn't grow around mold. I wonder why. Haha. Medicine literally changed the course of human history. If we reduce biodiversity, okay, if we get rid of stuff, okay, through habitat destruction or climate change or whatever, we're potentially losing those resources that we might not know we had. Again, going back to the beginning, what I said earlier, there's an estimated 13 million species. We have not found all of them. We have not cataloged all of them. We don't know how they could help us. All right? So that's why we want to maintain, we want to keep this diversity alive and well. Okay? So let's take a look at what happens if biodiversity is reduced, okay? We can reduce biodiversity in a variety of ways, like habitat destruction, climate change, introducing invasive species, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Super fun. What happens if I don't preserve biodiversity? Let's look at a story there, okay? So this is story time. Bananas and biodiversity. All right, I want you to think for a second. Okay, Halloween just passed, so maybe you got yourself some Halloween candy, and you might have noticed banana flavored candy, like banana runs or banana Laffy Taffy, best flavor. That don't taste anything like bananas, and you're like, why don't they taste like bananas? It's because that banana flavor in the candy is actually based on the flavor of a banana that is virtually extinct. Okay, so in the early 1900s, all right, bananas, with globalization, industrial revolution, transport improving, all that stuff, bananas kind of became a craze. People were like, bananas over bananas, as they should be, because they're delicious fruits. Okay, most of the world's banana supply came from one company, the United Fruit Company. And they bought land in Guatemala, and they grew only one type of banana called the Gros Michel. And you'd be like, why did they only grow one type? Well, they grew one type because they were really good at it. They figured out, hey, this banana tastes really delicious. We can grow it. Bananas are really interesting because they don't reproduce by making seeds. They reproduce by making little clones of themselves. Okay? So all these bananas that the United Fruit Company grew ended up being the exact same. They were literally clones of one another. And it was good for the company because they're like, okay, our product, the bananas, they're all identical. Every banana tastes the same. Every banana looks the same. It's always the right shape, the right size, the right flavor, all as well, right? Well, lo and behold, a few decades later, a fungal disease was introduced to the banana plantations in Guatemala. Okay, it's called Panama disease. It's a fungus and it destroys banana plants. Well, because all the bananas were the same, okay, there was a low genetic biodiversity. Every single plant got sick, and every single one died. So they're like, oh, shenanigans. All these gross Michelle bananas are dying. So then they had to find and cultivate a new type of banana. And now the bananas that we are used to seeing, if you go to the supermarket, chances are the bananas that you're buying are called Cavendish, and they taste a little different than the other bananas. All right, that's why they don't taste the same. But the problem is now the Cavendish is the primary banana that's being grown. Again, we're limiting the biodiversity. So if a disease comes along and it wipes out the Cavendish banana, now we gotta start all over. All right, if you have only one type of thingy, it's very easy for the whole population to get wiped out. All right. It's a little bananas and biodiversity. I want to leave you with a couple of analogies, a couple ways to think about biodiversity. All right, and why it's important. So this is my personal favorite one, Biodiversity and Jenga. I trust that we all understand the premise of Jenga. You basically have a tower of blocks, and you take turns removing one, and then until it falls over. All right, an ecosystem. You can think of an ecosystem like a tower of Jenga blocks. Okay, you can remove one, so that would be the equivalent of like causing extinction. Whoops. Like the dodo bird is extinct. The passenger pigeon is extinct. All right. The more blocks you take out, the more unstable this tower becomes. Just like in an ecosystem. If a bunch of species start to go extinct, all right, that ecosystem becomes more and more vulnerable. All right. So that is biodiversity, its importance. A couple ways to think about it, a couple of stories. All right. If you have any questions, give me a comment or an email and I will get back to you.